Hello everybody, what's up, and welcome to another week of the Illuminerdi's post-credits MCU recap show, this one being the Loki Lowdown. My name is Richard Nebens, I'm going to be your host for another episode of this exciting show, and right now we have possibly the craziest and best episode yet of Marvel Studios' Loki to get into. It's airing on Disney+. We just watched episode 4, which is entitled The Nexus Event. If you want to check out our watch long, you can check it out on YouTube from the Illuminerdi. And holy crap, do we have an episode to talk about. Where we left off last week, Loki and Sophia DiMartino's Sylvie were stuck on Lamentis 1 during that huge catastrophic disaster of an event in 2077. And this week, we actually get a little more backstory on Sylvie to start off and where she came from. And that is where we start off this episode. We see Sylvie right in Asgard. So she is basically the female version of Loki. Later on, she calls herself the Goddess of Mischief. And she was taken actually incredibly early in her life when she was just a little kid by the TVA because she basically wasn't supposed to exist at all, according to the Time Variance Authority, and Judge Renslayer herself took Sylvie in when Renslayer was just a regular old TVA soldier / agent. And she went through the same exact process as Loki, verifying everything she's ever said, going through the machine to verify she was a robot, and going on trial for her crimes before figuring out a way to escape and then living her whole life on her own. So she actually has an incredibly tragic backstory, does Lady Loki / Sylvie. And we get into that more a little bit later. But when we get to the present day, we see Renslayer talking to the Timekeepers. We don't see them quite yet. Then she reveals to Mobius that apparently C20 is dead and she's lost her mind before that happens. That'll come up again a little bit later, don't you worry, because there's some crazy stuff that happens. We go to Loki and Sylvie on Lamentis 1 as it's being crushed, rained upon by asteroids, by that moon that crashes into the planet. They bond a little. Loki talks to Sylvie about some of her old life on Asgard, how she barely remembers it. She's been fighting to live on her own for most of her life. And the TVA brings them back actually right before they end up getting killed by this disaster. And, obviously Sylvie and Loki both put up a fight because they are extremely mad about everything that the TVA stands for, finding out that, we find out in episode 3 that everybody at the TVA is a variant. Mobius and Loki start going at it over Loki's betrayal of Mobius, per se, before Mobius sends him into basically what's supposed to be a time loop torture device. We end up seeing him on Asgard, which is pretty cool, a little section of Asgard, before we get one of the coolest cameos we've gotten in Loki yet, Jamie Alexander's Lady Sif. So then what ends up happening with Lady Sif here is that Loki has to relive this event where he cut off some of her hair, I assume in her sleep, just to play some kind of funny prank on her, just because he's the god of mischief, and that's what he does. But then this event that happened was Sif just basically beat the crap out of him, kneed him, punched him, just beat him to the ground. But then she does that once. Loki reminds himself that after this he took a quick bath and, just enjoyed his time afterwards. But what he has to do in this time loop thing is he has to relive that same event over and over and over again. He just goes through physical torture, emotional torture. He is not having a good time in this time loop with Jamie Alexander's Lady Sif. Then we go back to the real world with the Time Variance Authority. Mobius is talking to P15 about why he wants to interrogate the Sylvie variant. And then he mentions that they've interviewed and interrogated Kree, Titans, and we get the MCU's first mention of vampires, which might be the biggest Easter egg of this episode, because we know that the MCU is bringing Blade into play sometime in 2022 or 23 or later, with Mahershala Ali playing the lead role. But this is the first official confirmation that the MCU has vampires. So that is super cool to hear Mobius mention that. And that's probably the smallest of the reveals that we get this episode, considering everything that comes later. So then Mobius gets Loki out of that time loop thing to try to interrogate him, see what's going on between him and Sylvie. Loki tries to explain that, you know, what everything that's happening with the Time Variance Authority. He actually does end up revealing to Mobius in quite angry fashion that they're all variants and that they were all stolen from their own lives, stolen from parts of the sacred timeline. Mobius obviously doesn't believe him at that point, and he throws him back into the hellhole with Sif. But yeah, I mean, this is some dramatic stuff. Some of the best acting I've seen out of Tom Hiddleston and Owen Wilson so far in this series. And Tom Hiddleston has proven himself over and over again as an actor in the MCU. After that, we get a little bit of Mobius and Renslayer in her office after officially closing the case, having drinks and everything. And then Mobius just starts questioning her about everything, everything about the case, everything about his time at the TVA, and she's getting super suspicious about why he's asking so many questions, obviously, because he's never really done that before. She puts up Sylvie's sword as a kind of a last trophy on her wall of trophies where she's collected from a bunch of cases. But the good thing is, while that's happening, Mobius switches out his TemPad with hers to see everything that's going on. And then we've got, moving on later, B-15 questioning Sylvie a little bit, trying to figure out what's going on with her. But B-15 actually takes her back to the Roxcart 2050 scenario that we saw in episode 2. And Sylvie explains to her that they're all variants, just like Loki was telling Mobius, and that she can't create memories at all. She can only pick from what's already there. So B-15 has Sylvie remind B-15 about what her life was before the TVA. Now, we don't see that actually happening, but it's obviously super emotional. We've got the rainfall coming, and B-15 is just shocked to see what she finds after Sylvie goes into her head. And Sylvie doesn't hurt her at all, but B-15 knows that there is some shady stuff going on. And she even described it as, "I looked happy." So she's going to play a big part in this potential overthrowing of the TVA at some point. Mobius goes hunting around after throwing Loki back in the hole. He actually finds the video of C-20 on Renslayer's TemPad as she's going through interrogation. C-20 is revealing the same thing as I've been saying for this entire episode, that everybody's a variant, that Sylvie revealed the same thing to her that she did to B-15. But then, this is where things get really crazy, is Renslayer basically has the video stopped. We assume that she pruned C-20. She's just gone and out of existence. So she may actually be dead and gone. But it was all because of Renslayer, and Renslayer is hiding some shady stuff from everybody in the TVA, from Loki, from Sylvie, obviously. And then Mobius rescues Loki from the time loop, reveals that he was right all along about the TVA, about everything that they were doing, and they try to agree to team up together and work together to try to take down whatever's happening at the Time Variance Authority. They get back, they get into this big thing with Renslayer, and then the craziest part here is that Owen Wilson's Mobius gets pruned before anything else happens. He's trying to fight back against Renslayer, and she just flat out prunes him. I mean, just shocking everybody. We can't believe that Owen Wilson's character is potentially gone 4 episodes in, and we don't know what's happening to him yet. But then we see Renslayer taking Loki and Sylvie all the way down in the elevator to the Timekeepers. Now, they get into a whole chat about what's going on. Loki basically says, "You can kill me if you want, because I can't even count how many times I've been killed, and do your worst," and everything. And then they get into a whole big fight against the guards down there. Renslayer jumps in fighting against Sylvie. Loki's trying to take down the guards. And then the craziest part about this, like I mentioned how Mobius got pruned, Renslayer full on prunes Loki. So he is gone from that timeline for the time being, before Sylvie just goes nuts and takes Renslayer in, threatens her with being pruned before basically saying, "You're going to tell me everything that's going on right now, and no matter what, or you're not going to live." So that's where things end off. And we also see that the Timekeepers are a total fake, because Sylvie throws her sword at one of their heads and it just gets chopped off easy, and it turns out to be a robot. So is this Kang behind this? Is it somebody else? We don't know. But so that's where the episode ends. And then we get our first post-credits teaser from Loki in episode 4. of Loki ending up on some other unknown world with somebody talking to him. And then we see 3 different Loki variants as well as a Thor variant in what looks to be a decimated New York City with the Avengers Tower in the background. We've got Richard E. Grant's older Loki. He looks like he's got the full-blown 60s costume a la Visions and WandaVision. We've got Kid Loki. We've got a crocodile Loki, for God's sake. And then we have a black Thor with a crazy new hammer in tow. And that's where we leave off at the end of this episode. And obviously the craziest episode that we've gotten for Loki. And I absolutely cannot wait to see where next week takes us with these different Loki variants, with Renslayer, with Loki and Sylvie now separated. We have so much to get into for 2 more episodes of this show, and I, for one, absolutely can't wait to find out what's happening. Thank you guys so much for joining me for another episode of the Loki Lowdown on the Illuminerdi's post-credits. You can check out my Twitter page at @rnebens. You can check out the Illuminerdi on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever your social media needs may find you. And hope you enjoyed our watch-along for episode 4. And I can't wait to see you guys next week for another crazy round of this insane show. Episode 5 of Loki coming next week. This has been Richard Nebens for the Illuminerdi's post-credits. Thanks for joining me.